Hey, kia ora. Helen Brums here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1276. Discovering an interesting place for research. Wonder where that would be. But what I would like to know from you, if you could put in the comments below, is what places have you found stashes of genealogical records, preferably in a public domain. I mean, you find interesting genealogical records inside your own family, inside the houses and that sort of stuff. But I'm looking more for like a repository, like, a public place that has different archive records and things like that. Because what I found is I was reading through the UK version of the Family Tree, this Family Tree magazine. It's the one from December. I think it's December's one. Where's the date? Yep, December. It's from December, and it's the Family Tree. It's the UK version. And I came across this interesting article that was talking about their parliamentary archives. And I thought, oh, I wonder what's in there. The very first thing that struck me as strange was that their records started in 1497. Yes, you heard that correctly. 1497. 1497. That was over 500 years ago. I'm like, oh. And so I just kept reading. And they do get a lot of, lawyers and academics visiting because of all the acts and everything else that got passed. So you'd have these acts of parliament. Now, what was interesting in there is that before 1844, anything that had to be done, like naturalization or road construction, a bridge construction, had to be an act of parliament. And I'm like, somebody got naturalized. And they said because it was an expensive process to get an act of parliament passed so that you could be naturalized as a British citizen, often groups of people would get together and all be on one act of parliament. And they even said that they said you can see it on the act of hang on, they had it here what it was actually called. So you've got where is it? Oh, there it is. So they say this can be seen in the Act of Parliament and the Act of the composer George Frederick Handel, which appears to have been initially written for one man, Louis. Oh, here we go with funny names. Sichaya. However, at a later date, 3 other men's names have been added, including Handel's. So that was done in 1726. After 1844, they started issuing certificates. But before 1844, if you wanted to be naturalized as a British citizen, you had to do it as an act of parliament. And I'm like, that's really cool. So, but even if they wanted a road constructed, a bridge constructed, they wanted to build a house, it had to be done as an act of parliament because there was no other way for them to give permission for this stuff to be done at the time. And, building canals and railroads later on and everything else. But these archives go back to 1497, which was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of parliamentary records. And I'm like, what's in the National Archives? So now it's got me thinking of other archive places. And I'm like, well, I know we have a National Archives in New Zealand. I wonder if all the parliamentary records are there or are they kept somewhere else? But there was just like different things in there. It says from 1794, promoters of these projects, which is canals and railroads and all of that. Well, of course, railways came later on. Were required to submit plans of the proposed work to support their application. And many of these survived in the archives. And I thought, isn't that the coolest thing? And from they said they mainly get legal and academics coming through because of all the different acts that they have in there. And that's what they're going for, is for the legislative stuff. But I thought, there'd be a lot of family history in there as well, because they say the archives consist of, so the parliamentary archives are custodians of records of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and some private papers of prominent politicians. And they say our records start from 1497 and are still collecting to this day. This amounts to over 13 kilometers of physical records and a growing digital repository. I'm like, that's a ton of records. I mean, 13 kilometers. I have no idea what that is. I should have looked it up in miles. 13 kilometers to miles. There we go. 13 kilometers is 8 miles. That's a lot of paperwork. And so it's actually stored in the Victoria Tower. And here is, let me get back here. There's a picture here. This is the Victoria Tower here as part of the Westminster, and you'll hear a lot of the Palace of Westminster, which is where they hold all of their parliamentary stuff and everything else. But at the time that it was built, it was actually one of the tallest structures in the world at the time it was built. But I just thought that's really interesting. That was, to me, was just interesting. And let's see. This document here, they say is Handel's Naturalization Act of 1726. So that's what the act looked like for him to become naturalized, along with some other people. And then this picture over here is the Saltash Floating Bridge in 1832. Isn't that cool? But this one's really cool. This one down the bottom here, you know what this is? I'm kind of worried about the red blotches that are on there. It's the death warrant of King Charles I from the 26th of January, 1649. That's what a death warrant looked like in 1649. I'm just like, wow, I wish it was a little clearer so I could actually read it a little better. But yeah, for King Charles I. Isn't that kind of cool? And it was sort of like, man, I'd just love to go in there and see what's in there. And they say, as well as the Act's supporting documentation may also survive among the House of the Lords main papers. It was just fascinating. Just read, and this article is just this. That's the article. But it was just fascinating of what you could pull out of there. 13 kilometers, so about 8 miles of records. 13 kilometers, 8 miles of records from 1497 to present, and it's still growing because every time they meet, they pass an act. They they have their minutes of their meetings or whatever their equivalent of minutes are. They get stored in there. If they get private papers from prominent politicians, they get stored in there as well. But it would be fascinating to go through, and they do get some genealogists going in there, especially if the family had a politician somewhere in the line, and they can go in there and they can do some research on that politician, that person, to see what contributions that they made, whether in the House of Lords, whether in the House of Commons. What acts did they sign, did they agree with and sign, and are there any of their private papers in there? So yeah, from a genealogical point of view, it's a really cool thing to be able to go in and search and research and all of that. And I was just sort of like, I never even thought about records, like parliamentary records. And so now it's just sort of like, okay, where else could we go to find these types of records of, whatever country you're in, and whatever your government system is, where are the archives, and how old are the archives, and how much information do they still have in their archives of laws that have been passed, amendments, here in the States would be amendments, and, what are some of the paperwork that they have from the Senate and from the House, and where would they be stored, and are they available to the public for viewing, and how much, how much of, when did they first start keeping the records and things like that. And then you would have, New Zealand would probably be the National Archives. I'm just guessing. I don't know. They may have a separate repository for the parliamentary stuff. But ours wouldn't go back to 1497. No. New Zealand is a very young country compared to a lot of other countries around. And they had the Treaty of Waitangi, which was the land deal between the Europeans and the Maoris, was signed on the 6th of February in 1840. So that tells you how young New Zealand is. Yet you come to the States and you've got, When was it? Mayflower was 16. When was the Mayflower? 16 something. That was in the 1600s. Was it 1629? When did the Mayflower? Oh, when did the Mayflower land? 1620. Was it 1620? Yeah. Excuse me. So that was in 1620 for the Mayflower. So you've got, what records do they still have from the Mayflower? And it's just all of a sudden just opens up other questions when you start thinking of records and things like that. And what records do states have? How far back do their records go in each of the states? Or if you're in Canada, the provinces, or if you're in Australia, the territories. And a lot of other places, it could just be the districts or the counties, based on what type of country it is and how it's split up into counties, states, districts, who knows, territories, provinces. How far back do the records go for the nation? How far back do their records go? So it's just it's very interesting. Just when I was reading that, it got me thinking of other government systems and how old are their records and what sort of records do they hold in their repository. So, like I said, in this one here for the UK Parliament, they have records of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and some private papers of prominent politicians, and then all the acts that got passed. I wonder if they have any acts that, no, I guess it wouldn't be an act if it was declined. I guess there would just be the paperwork there for it to say denied. But yeah, so it was kind of interesting just reading that article. And this is what I love about just picking up magazines and reading. You never know what you're going to find. But anyway, so that's it for me from tonight. So what places have you heard of that have different records? I know that the Freemasons, they have records dating back to whenever, based on how long their country's I don't know, chapter, head office, whatever they've got a lot of records in there as well, the Freemasons, and different societies and organizations would have records that go back as well. But so what places have you been surprised to find some genealogical records or records that would help you in your research by learning the history of the area? So that's it from me for tonight. Let us know in the comments below some of the unusual places that you've found records that you can use on your genealogy research. And it could just be something, it could be a piece of history. Museums have fantastic records, have a lot of stuff and records and that sort of thing as well. Family history societies, genealogy societies, they all have some sort of record somewhere. Daughters of the American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution, they have genealogy trees in their records because and they're one of those societies where you have to prove that you belong in that society. So you have to prove your lineage to show that, yes, I had some great-grandfather back then who fought in the American Revolution for the Americans, to be part of the Daughters or the Sons of the American Revolution. For the Mayflower, you have to prove that you descended from somebody on the Mayflower. So there's different ones. Like I know that there's one here for the Clan Ross. I had to prove that I descended from the Rosses from Scotland. It didn't take much because I just went back to my second great-grandfather who was born in Scotland. Some people have to go back several generations. And then there's, what's the other one? Americans of British descent. That's another one I can go and join. I just have to prove that I'm British. I've got British ancestry. Well, that's not going to take much because my dad's grandfather was born in England. And that's just one of my great-grandparents. So yeah, my great-grandfather was born in England, and I have a very strong connection to England. So that one's not going to take much either. There was ones in the DNA testing on Family Tree DNA, you can actually join different groups on there based on your DNA. And I saw one for Cornwall in England, and in my DNA, it shows that I have English, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, Scandinavian, and Cornish from Cornwall. And yes, it's surprisingly enough, it shows that I have Cornish roots. And I definitely have a very strong connection to Cornwall in England. three of my four grandparents have ancestors that were from that area of England. It's a lot. And what was really funny is that I told them, they said, how far back do you go? Well, they actually worded the question wrong. How far back do you go with your Cornish genealogy? And I go, well, I can go back to my 10th great grandfather here. I can go back to my 7th great grandfather here, my 6th over here, and da-da-da. Like, I had a list. And they said, oh, those ones are a little far out. How close? They said they actually worded the question incorrectly, but how close what's your nearest Cornish relative? And so I put in there, well, this second great grandfather was born in Cornwall. These were his parents. He passed away in New Zealand. This one came out. This one immigrated to New Zealand in such and such a time from this area. And I went through and listed those. And he goes, "Oh, you're from New Zealand? You're in." I said, "You mean to say that's all I had to do was just tell you I'm from New Zealand?" He's like, "Basically, yeah." But what was interesting is that in the Cornwall DNA group, they have surnames that people are researching or that they are descended from. Not one of my ancestors are listed. Not one ancestor is listed there. Like, I've got the names, and some of them had been there for generations, and nobody else in the group had those names in their genealogy. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because it's got in there, these are the surnames that we're researching. And I went through and I looked up all of my great grandparents or second great grandparents who are of Cornish descent, and their names been prominent in those areas for several generations. Not one other person in that group is looking for those last names, is doing any research on those last names, which I thought was really, really interesting. There's a lot of people from the same areas of Cornwall that my ancestors were in, but I thought it was interesting that, it was a pretty prominent, there's several generations in there, and it just surprised me that nobody else in the DNA group were looking at any of those names. So actually, I must go back and check again. Gotta go keep checking and everything else. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Anyway, I'm out of here. Gotta go have some dinner. Have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening around 6 p.m. Pacific. He konara.